Extraordinary X-Men, Moon Knight, Justice League Dark, Primordial, ganó el premio Eisner, el premio Schuster, el Shake, y nominaciones a muchos más. Tiene una carrera tan larga que no nos da el tiempo para hablar de todo, así que si no nombro el cómic favorito de alguien, perdónenme, pero bueno, I was just listing some of the things you've worked on and some of the awards you've won, and apologizing beforehand if I don't talk about a specific comic somebody likes, because you've done so much stuff that we would have to be here 4 or 5 hours. If I ever get you for my podcast, I will have you 4 or 5 hours if I can. Ok, bueno, Jeff empezó estudiando cine, enfocado en la fotografía, y a mí me gustaría preguntarle cómo eso ayudó a formar su forma de trabajar en el cómic. You studied film, and you had a particular interest in cinematography, right? I would like to know if that helped inform your work in comics or influence the way you plan out a page or you draw sequences.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I grew up reading comics mostly, but when I went to school, when I was in my teens and early 20s, I went to film school, and I studied film, obviously, and the cinematography really caught my attention, and I think I started drawing comics seriously right around the same time that I was studying film, so I think I was taking a lot of influences from cinema and cinematographers in particular, and really those were in the back of my mind when I was first drawing my first comics and thinking about how to compose panels and pace stories. So there's definitely an overlap with cinematic storytelling and my early comics, for sure. I think you can see it in them.
Bueno, creció leyendo cómics, pero en su adolescencia, cuando quiso estudiar algo, se puso a estudiar cine, y definitivamente al inspirarse en el trabajo de los cinematógrafos y de los fotógrafos en español y cómo planean las tomas y demás, eso siempre estaba en su mente cuando diseñaba las páginas, y sobre todo se puede ver en sus primeros trabajos. You started doing what we call indie comics because, well, we had to start somewhere, but at some point you decided to work full-time on this, or at least give it a go, to have a career out of it. When did that click in your head that you were going to do this as a way of life, even if you had to juggle it at first with a day job? I heard you were a cook at some point, and I forgot to say the question in Spanish, so one moment. Empezó en cómics independientes, pero en algún momento dijo, bueno, yo me voy a dedicar a esto. ¿Cuál fue el momento en que le hizo ese clic en la cabeza, incluso si tenía que barajarlo con un trabajo cualquiera como hacemos otros? Llegó a trabajar de cocinero incluso en un momento.
Yeah, when I finished school, I was drawing comics all the time, but I was, like you said, just doing them mostly for myself, indie comics or just very small print runs where I would sell them around local stores, and it certainly wasn't anything I could make any money doing. I was just doing it for the love of the medium. And I didn't really ever think I would make a career out of comics. It didn't seem like a realistic path for me. I didn't know anyone who did comics for a living. So I always thought I would always have to juggle making comics with working a real job, a day job. I worked as a cook, like you said, and I worked night shifts. So I would work night shifts in the kitchen and then come home and I would draw all day. And I kind of thought that's what I would probably do for the rest of my life. I didn't think I would ever really make money with comics, But then I think my comics started to get a little bit better, and I started submitting them to some publishers, and my Essex County graphic novels got published in the States. And even when those were published, I still wasn't really making money. So I kind of thought it would be something I always had to juggle, a paying job with comics. But I guess I got lucky or fortunate enough that some of the editors at DC Comics liked Essex County and asked me to pitch some stories to them. So Sweet Tooth came from that, and it was really with Sweet Tooth where I was making a page rate, and it was a monthly comic, so I could afford to quit the kitchen and work in comics full time. And then even that, I didn't know if that would last forever, but one thing led to another, and here I am 20 years later still making a living at it. So.
I'd say you're doing good. Bueno, cuando estaba estudiando, dibujaba cómics todo el tiempo para sí mismo, no pensaba que podía realmente trabajar de eso, pero bueno, publicó algunas cosas chicas, trabajaba de noche en la cocina y de día dibujaba todo el día. Cuando hace la trilogía de Essex County, que bueno, eso se publica por Top Shelf en Estados Unidos, eso le llama la atención a DC, de ahí nace Sweet Tooth, que es realmente el momento en el que él empieza a tener un cómic mensual con un pago por página y le dijo, bueno, me puedo dedicar a esto y largar la cocina. Antes de eso nunca había pensado que se iba a poder dedicar a esto. Speaking of hablando de ese county, I forget the order, sorry. Hablando de ese county, mucha gente lo conoce por el trabajo de Marvel y DC, como Old Man Logan o Justice League Dark, o por Sweet Tooth en un futuro post-apocalíptico, pero su entrada a la industria fue esta trilogía de Essex County, que son muy mundanas, muy cotidianas, y como que él estaba buscando establecer su propia voz como autor y no copiar a Grant Morrison, a Neil Gaiman, que admiraba. Yo quería saber cuánto de su propia vida, que él creció en una granja, en un lugar rural, inspiró y informó esta vida. Y bueno. So, you started Essex County, as I read somewhere, as a way to find your own voice as an author and stop copying Neil Gaiman or Grant Morrison, who you admire, to find how Jeff Lemire wrote. You grew up in a farm, is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
And Essex County is a very much grounded tale versus a post-apocalyptic future of Sweet Tooth or Justice League Dark or Old Man Logan. How much of your early life and the people you knew went into creating Essex County?
Yeah, I think before Essex County I was trying to do all kinds of different comics and to varying degrees of success. Some of them were pretty good, some of them not so good, but I didn't really feel like any of them were particularly honest or speaking about my life in any way. And then I think when I did Essex County, I decided to kind of stop trying to tell, like you said, stop trying to copy the authors I love and do like some big horror comic or a science fiction comic and just do something really personal. And it really was, it's a real place where I grew up, and a lot of the characters, it's not fiction, it's not autobiographical, but a lot of the characters are combinations of different people I knew, or I would exaggerate certain characters I knew growing up and kind of put them together, and just, so it is very much sort of a portrait of where I grew up and the community I grew up in. And I think in doing that, in stripping away all the genre stuff and everything, I really did find my voice as a writer doing that story, and I was able to take what I learned doing that and put it into genre stuff later, with Black Hammer and Sweet Tooth and all the other things I did. Once you kind of find your voice, then you learn how to do those different sort of genre projects, but still make them feel specific to you.
You still draw a lot of farms everywhere.
I still do, yeah.
Dice que sí, que estaba haciendo todo tipo de historias diferentes, tratando de crear el próximo gran cómic de ciencia ficción, de horror, y en un momento dijo, no, tengo que encontrar cómo escribo yo, y ese county es el lugar real donde él creció. Por supuesto que no es autobiográfico 100%, la gente son combinaciones de personas reales y las situaciones también, pero eso le sirvió para encontrar su voz y luego volcarlo en Sweet Tooth, en Black Hammer, y por eso dice que dibuja muchas granjas igual hoy día, siempre hay muchas granjas. You moved on from creator-owned work, first with Essex County, then with Sweet Tooth and Vertigo, and then doing for-hire stuff like Justice League Dark or Old Man Logan. How do you find a balance between the stuff you create yourself or pitching stuff or getting pitched stuff by editors? And I have to say this in Spanish because again, trabaja mucho en cosas propias como Sweet Tooth o Essex County, pero después saltó a el trabajo por encargo, Justice League Dark, Old Man Logan. ¿Cómo encuentra el balance entre sus propias creaciones y proponer ideas para personajes de las empresas o que un editor venga y se las proponga?
I think I'm lucky in that it can work pretty quickly. So I'm able to juggle multiple projects. The stuff that I'm drawing myself or my creator-owned stuff, is always really important to me. And if I had to choose one, I would probably just do that stuff. But I don't have to choose one because I'm able to do multiple books. So it's allowed me to, explore like DC Comics and Marvel Comics and things. All these characters I grew up loving and getting a chance to write them myself. It's really kind of an honor and really fun to do. So luckily I don't need to choose between the two, but I do feel like being able to do both helps keep me fresh because they kind of use different parts of my creative brain. So if I'm working on a creator-owned book for a long time and need a break, it's like I can go and write an issue of something for DC and kind of recharge my batteries. And by going back and forth between those kinds of projects, it kind of keeps you fresh. So I enjoy doing both, really. I'm lucky that I can do it.
Bueno, tiene la suerte de que trabaja rápido y que puede alternar diferentes proyectos. Creció con los personajes de Marvel y DC, es un placer escribirlos, pero le permite mantener fresco lo que hace, porque un trabajo propio y un trabajo para una editorial encargado utiliza diferentes partes de su ser creativo y le permite cambiar cuando está bloqueado con algo y mantener, bueno, como dijimos, fresco. Speaking of the stuff you draw, hablando de las cosas que escribís y dibujás vos mismo, ¿cómo elegís cuál vas a dibujar vos y cuál vas a buscar a un dibujante para dibujarla? Speaking of the stuff that you write and draw yourself, your create your own projects, how do you choose whether to draw it yourself, like Sweet Tooth or Minor Arcana, or look for an artist to draw it, like Primordial or Black Hammer?
Well, when I first started out, I was only drawing stuff, only writing and drawing my own stuff, so that's all I knew. And then the more that I got to do different kinds of projects, it became obvious I couldn't draw everything myself. And so I think what really happened, I developed relationships with certain artists like Andrea Sorrentino and Dustin Nguyen and Dean Ormsted and these people that I work with again and again on projects. So now, since I work with those guys all the time, I'm usually, when I think of stuff that I want to draw myself, I'm thinking about it for myself, and likewise I'll come up with ideas specifically for those artists now. So things like Primordial or Descender or Black Hammer, I was trying to think of stories specifically for those specific artists, and so I'm always, and so I guess it's a confusing way of saying it, but I think it's usually like I know I'm going to do a project with a certain artist first, and then I come up with the idea. It's usually not the other way around.
But was this born from working on them with them for higher projects, and then you said, "Oh, hey, this was a cool relationship. Let's do this."
Mostly, yeah. I think because earlier in my career, I thought my creator stuff would just be stuff that I drew myself. I didn't think I would also write creator books like Descender or Gideon Falls or things like that. But then the more that I did the work for hire stuff, I realized, I can write creator books for these artists as well. And I developed a relationship with Andrea Sorrentino from doing Green Arrow and things like that. So it was an easy progression to take what we were doing at DC and then create something of our own together. And then that opened a whole different doorway for me where I realized the creator stuff could be stuff I drew myself and stuff that I collaborated on. And then once that started happening, it really opened up the kinds of stories I could tell. And I wasn't limited to just things because my art style is very specific and it wouldn't suit every kind of story, but suddenly I could create any kind of story for these other artists, and it really opened up things creatively for me.
Bueno, al principio era él solo dibujando y escribiendo, pero eventualmente desarrolló relaciones de trabajo con otros artistas como Dustin Nguyen o Andrea Sorrentino, trabajando por ejemplo en Green Arrow o con otras cosas, y ahí empezó a pensar en proyectos que a veces le nacen para dibujar él mismo y otras veces dice, tengo una idea para trabajar con Andrea, tengo una idea para trabajar con Dustin, y ahí nace el proyecto para hacerlo con ellos. También tiene que ver con el hecho de que su estilo se ajusta a determinado tipo de historias, pero ahora se le abrió todo un abanico al tener otros artistas con los cuales trabajar, de poder escribir otro tipo de cosas para otros tipos de arte. Le voy a preguntar ahora cómo cambió su estilo para escribir, su proceso para escribir, cuando empezó a escribir para otras personas, porque es muy distinto cuando escribís para vos mismo, y cómo cambió incluso su propio proceso para escribir cuando va a dibujar él. Speaking of collaborating with other artists, how has your writing process and style evolved since working only for your own art, when you are going to write for Andrea or Dustin? And how's it changed when you're still writing for yourself to draw? If it has.
I think originally I was just drawing for myself. So when I first started writing scripts for another artist to draw, I was so used to controlling every element visually myself that it was hard to let go. And I think my scripts were very specific, and I was sort of maybe describing a little too much what I wanted them to draw and how I wanted them to draw it, you know, and not letting them be themselves enough, the artists, you know, and then the more I did it, the more I learned to let go of the visual side of things and let those different artists bring their strengths to it. So my scripts got probably a little more stripped down or a little more minimalist, where I was concentrating more on dialogue and pacing and plot, and I left the visual side up to the artist completely. My art direction is very minimal, you know, but that also comes from working with the same artists over time, where you develop a trust in each other and you know what they do well, and you trust them to do it. So I think my scripts got a little more loose and laid back. But I do, you know, even for myself now, I think obviously when I know I'm drawing something myself, I don't have to describe it to myself because I'm already imagining it. So my scripts tend to be very, for myself, are very, it's really just pacing it out and getting the dialogue. I don't worry too much about the visuals because I'm doing all that work in the thumbnails and in the layouts and stuff anyway.
Así que bueno, al principio cuando trabajaba para otros dibujantes, describía mucho lo que quería que dibujaran y de a poco empezó a confiar en que ellos trajeran su contenido visual, su estilo, y sus guiones empezaron a volverse más esquemáticos y más concentrados en los diálogos, dejando que el artista trajera lo suyo. Y cuando escribe para él, directamente no describe nada, porque eso lo hace en otra parte del proceso, cuando hace las miniaturas, los esquemas de página, y el guión es más un tema del ritmo de cada página. Sweet Tooth también es una obra que tiene que ver quizás con su pasado en la granja, pero al mismo tiempo tiene mucho que ver con lo que hace la humanidad con la naturaleza, y a mí me gustaría saber qué conexión tiene eso con lo que hizo en Animal Man después, que también habla un poco de ese tipo de cosas. So, speaking of Sweet Tooth and how it connects with, well, of course, your background in a rural setting and what man does to the planet, but then you jumped on to Animal Man, that's also been a comic with that sort of commentary. How was the feedback between the two projects? Were there things that you wanted to do in one, but you got to do in the other, and so forth?
Not really. I think, you know, I think on the surface there's a connection between those two books, and you know, Animal Hybrids and Sweet Tooth, and then Animal Man and his whole his power set. But I never really saw them as being very similar, even when I was writing them. You know, Sweet Tooth for me was always a very personal story about fatherhood and about a young boy sort of trying to maintain hope in a very bleak world, you know. And Animal Man was very different for me. That was much more about a family and about a father with young children, protecting them, and they felt very different to me, even though maybe on the surface they may seem like they had similarities. I never really felt that as I was working on both of those projects at the same time. I never felt any crossover, or I never felt like there were ideas that I wanted to do in one that I did in the other or anything. They felt like very different worlds to me at the time.
Más allá de alguna similitudes en español, superficial entre temáticas de animales y eso, no encuentra un punto de conexión entre los dos proyectos. Sweet Tooth es más sobre un niño tratando de sobrevivir en un mundo complejo, tiene una parte de paternidad, mientras que Animal Man tiene también un tema de familia y eso, pero él nunca encontró un punto en común. My bad.
No, it's good. And I think the other thing too is that Sweet Tooth was like, I created that world myself. It was all my own. Whereas, Animal Man was part of a bigger universe that already existed, and he already had a history with Grant Morrison and other writers before me. So it was more continuing the legacy that they had set up, and so they felt very different to me anyway.
También es cierto que él creó todo el mundo de Sweet Tooth de la nada, de cero, y Animal Man viene de un universo mucho más amplio y trabajando sobre lo que ya habían hecho otros autores como Grant Morrison. Siguiendo con Sweet Tooth, él fue consultor, estuvo en parte de la filmación y también trabajó en la versión en televisión de este, hecha en Canadá. Me gustaría saber si ahora quiere crear cosas originales para televisión, más que adaptaciones, o si simplemente quiere quedarse en el estudio donde trabaja tranquilo solo. So you worked as a consultant in Sweet Tooth, you were there for some of the filming, and then you were very involved in the Essex County adaptation for the Canadian television.
Yeah.
Did this make you want to create original stuff for TV yourself? You just want to stay in the studio and work in comics.
Yeah, they were both very different experiences. Sweet Tooth, I was much more hands-off. I got to visit the set and be a part of things, but much more as an observer and just sort of, I got to enjoy seeing the world come to life, and then in Essex County was much more, I wrote every episode, I was on set, producing everything, and it was very stressful and an intense period. And both, especially that, although I'm proud of the final product, it was very stressful, and it just really made me appreciate the immediacy of comics and how I could sit down at my desk and create a story all by myself, and it can be in people's hands to read a few months later, whereas movies and television take so long to get anything done, and there's so many people involved to try to maintain your vision with all those people. It's very hard, and it just really made me, I always love comics, but it even more made me appreciate the freedom, the creative freedom that I have, and like I said, the immediacy of the medium, how it goes directly from the creator to the reader, very, very directly. There's just an editor, maybe a publisher involved, but they're not really, compared to film and TV, it's so much more direct and kind of pure.
Estaba muy apartado del proceso, a pesar de que estaba ahí, porque televisión y cine tiene un montón de personas involucradas, lleva un montón de tiempo. Siempre amó los cómics, pero trabajar en televisión lo hizo amarlos todavía más, porque hay algo mágico en que puede crear un cómic ahora en su escritorio y en un par de meses está en las manos de los lectores, que va a haber una editorial involucrada, pero nunca es la misma cantidad de gente por la que pasan las manos en audiovisual, y que hay muchas más personas ahí involucradas, y es más difícil que tu visión se termine transmitiendo al público. Bueno, acá le voy a preguntar un poco sobre Primordial, que es un cómic que explora el regreso a la Tierra de la perra laica y de dos chimpancés del proyecto espacial estadounidense, de vuelta hay granjas, de vuelta hay animales. A mí me gustaría saber si lo fascinaba la exploración espacial y por qué no me hizo llorar tanto con este cómic. So, Primordial, again, there's animals, there's farms, but there's also a big component. You're in your 40s, you're not much older than I am. We grew up with space exploration in the forefront. Was that something that always fascinated you and you wanted to bring it into your comics? Again, speaking about what man does to nature, and also why did you make me cry so hard with that comic?
I was never, to be honest, never really all that interested in, I grew up in the 80s and, space exploration was a big part of the culture back then. But it was never something I was particularly interested in. I think for me, Primordial came more out of my love of science fiction, and Stanley Kubrick, 2001: A Space Odyssey being, I think, my favorite film ever, and just the sense of mystery and wonder that film brings, and I wanted to try to capture something like that in comics. And also, I was working with Andrea Sorrentino a lot, and we had done Gideon Falls, which was really kind of a horror comic, and we wanted to do something that felt really different from Gideon Falls. So doing science fiction felt very different for us. So with all that in mind, I'm not really sure I can't remember where the idea came up with, but I was always fascinated with the first animal sent to space. I always felt it was such a tragic story in a way, that they gave their lives so that we could explore space, and then obviously I have a love of animals as well. And everything, so it just felt like a very human story, even though it wasn't about humans. Something that could tap into the mystery and the awe of science fiction and space, but also be very intimate and human, and those things appeal to me.
No le interesaba mucho la exploración espacial, a pesar de que en los 80, eso fue algo que agregué, los que somos de los 80 crecimos con eso muy enfrente nuestro, sino más bien nace de su amor por la ciencia ficción, por 2001 Odisea del Espacio de Kubrick, y quería buscar hacer algo similar. Venía a trabajar con el artista Andrea Sorrentino en Gideon Falls, que era un cómic de horror, y querían hacer algo muy distinto. No recuerdo exactamente lo que era la idea, pero le apasionaba, le interesaba la idea de que los primeros animales enviados al espacio no volvieron y dieron sus vidas para la exploración humana, y quería contar una historia así muy humana, a pesar del hecho de que fueran animales. Ahora voy a preguntar un poquito sobre Black Hammer, que es un universo de superhéroes, por así decirlo. Bueno, yo iba a preguntar si hay algún rincón del universo que le queda por explorar, pero ayer anunció que lo va a relanzar en noviembre o octubre, así que obviamente sí. Y más bien él ha escrito casi todo, salvo una de las miniseries y una miniserie de historias cortas. Me gustaría saber si tiene ganas de invitar a otros autores a jugar con sus juguetes y él trabajar más como una especie de showrunner. Speaking of Black Hammer, I was going to ask if you had any corners left to explore, but you announced the relaunch the other day, so obviously you want to do it with Teddy Christensen, no less. Va a trabajar con Teddy Christensen, un autor danés bastante distinto al estilo. His style is very different to what was being done before in Black Hammer. But beyond exploring new corners of the universe yourself, you wrote most of the stuff in Black Hammer. You had Tate Bromberg writing the Barbarian one, and then you invited Jeff Johns, Kelly Thompson, and others, and Patton Oswalt to write for Visions. Are you planning on inviting others to play with your toys and working in a more showrunner-like capacity for Black Hammer?
No, I think Black Hammer, a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it got really big where there were multiple miniseries coming out all at the same time, and the world was really expanding all the time. And at that point, I thought it would be fun to bring in some other writers, like you mentioned, to do short stories and sort of add some color to the universe. But it did reach a point right around that time where I felt like it got a little too big for me, and I didn't want to lose my original vision for the story, So I felt like the best thing to do was to shrink it back down again into just one story at a time that I would write. So that's where I'm at now, is really keeping it small again. And I had fun expanding, but now I just want to keep it small and do one story at a time that I can really, put my all into it. And I got really lucky to work with Teddy Christensen on this new one, because I'm a huge fan of Teddy's, and we connected through social media. But we're working on this Black Hammer project, and now we're already discussing a couple other new books as well, non-Black Hammer things. So that's been a fun collaboration.
You're gonna love it when the creative juices start flowing with another author. Bueno, dice que en un momento Black Hammer creció mucho y había muchas miniseries, y ahora en realidad le gustó invitar a otras personas por un rato, pero ahora en realidad quiere concentrarse en contar una sola historia a la vez. Tuvo la suerte de conectarse con Teddy, que admiraba mucho su trabajo, Teddy Christensen. Y que además de trabajar en Black Hammer empezaron a hablar de otro montón de proyectos, que es algo muy lindo cuando eso pasa con otro autor. Bueno, él tiene un obvio amor por los cómics mainstream, por los superhéroes clásicos, pero se lo conoce por su trabajo indie, y cuando trabaja con personajes mainstream son como cosas más extrañas, como Animal Man o Justice Dark, quizás lo más así como de carteles, Green Arrow, o ahora que viene con Justice Society of America. Pero me gustaría saber estos proyectos así como más de acción o qué, si vienen de él o vienen de los editores, y si ha tenido que rechazar algún tipo de trabajo así como, no, yo no quiero hacer los Avengers. So, this is kind of a long one. You're known for, your love for mainstream comics is known, it's obvious in your work, but you're known, principally for your indie stuff and then more offbeat or dark stuff like Justice League Dark or Animal Man. You've got some more key stuff like Green Arrow or your upcoming Justice Society of America, but when you work on these more superhero classic standard projects, are these stuff that you pitch to the editors, or do they come to you and say, Jeff, we want you to do this? And have you ever had to turn down, no, I don't want to do the Avengers, I don't want to do Superman, that's too mainstream?
Geez, well, it's usually editors who approach me to do those projects, and I've said no to many things, I can't even, off the top of my head, I can't think of specifics right now, but over the years there have been many things that were pitched to me that I either was too busy to do, or I just didn't see how I could take my personality and my style and put it into those characters, so I did say no to a lot of things, but I don't know that it's not so much that I prefer things that are dark or that are a little less mainstream. It's just if I have a love for those characters or not, and if I can see a way to do them that feels exciting to me or personal to me, Animal Man was a perfect character at the perfect time for me, for instance, because I was a new father at the time, and it was about a superhero who was a father, and I could put a lot of those things in my own life into that. And same with, when I did Moon Knight, it's a book about mental health, and I've experienced my own struggles with that, so it was, you could put parts of yourself into those characters, and that's kind of what I look for in those. More so than any specific character, it's more, what can I bring to it that makes it unique or different from what's been done before, and it doesn't always work out. Sometimes they work better than others, but it's usually coming at it from, how do I make it emotional? How do I make it personal? Even though it is a big character, So.
As someone who struggles with mental health, thank you. I think it's very important to talk about it in our media and art. Thank you. Dice que sí ha tenido que rechazar un montón de ese tipo de cosas, ya ni se acuerda de cuáles, pero no busca tanto que sean algo oscuro o poco común, sino en qué personajes puede poner de sí mismo. Hablar de su experiencia como padre en Animal Man, en Moon Knight hablar de la salud mental, que yo le dije que como alguien que también tiene sus problemas con eso es importantísimo ver de eso y se lo agradecí. Él busca qué puede contar, no importa cuán grande y famoso sea el personaje, busca cómo puede hacerlo más emocional, conectar y poner de sí mismo en él. Si ven que me olvido de algo, alguien que entendió el inglés me avisa porque puede ser que pase. I may forget part of your answers while I'm translating, so I'm telling people to remind me if they speak English. Hablando de la Justice Society of America, que se lanza ahora en breve, su amor por la Golden Age se ve en Black Hammer, y estoy seguro que se va a ver acá. Quiero saber qué pueden esperar los lectores de una JSA de Jeff Lemire, porque ya mostró que está leyendo los Young Stars de Roy Thomas con personajes como Iron Man, Roy Fury, y quiero saber. Speaking of the JSA, I can tell you love the Golden Age superheroes with Black Hammer, and I want to know what people can expect from a JSA by Jeff Lemire. I saw that you're already reading Young All Stars by Roy Thomas with characters like Iron Man. I love pulp characters. So what can people expect from the Justice Society with Jeff Lemire in the writing seat?
Yeah, that's a book I've wanted to write for a long time, and it almost happened a few different times in my career, and it didn't work out. Those are my favorite superheroes. Those Golden Age DC characters have always been my favorite. And if you've read Black Hammer, I put a lot of that love into those characters. So I was really excited to get to finally do the Justice Society, and I wanted to make sure I did something that, like I said, felt unique to me, and I could put my personality into it, but also those characters, more than any other superheroes, in American comics. They have the longest history, the longest legacy. You know, they were the original superheroes created in the 1930s, and they've been published ever since. So they have such a long lineage of history that I want to pay homage to, and I have a lot of respect for it, I guess. And I want to balance telling very personal, emotional stories with these characters, but also celebrate their entire history and make sure that all the different sort of incarnations throughout the years are represented somehow in what I'm doing. So it's a very big book with very big canvas, lots of characters, but really intimate stories it's about a family. You know, they're a superhero family with different generations working together, and it's been really fun. I've enjoyed writing this book maybe more than any book I've ever done at DC.
Really looking forward. Dice que sí, ama a los superhéroes de la Golden Age. Se nota, dice que lo puso en Black Hammer, y que los personajes de la Justice Society fueron creados en los 30 y son los primeros superhéroes de Estados Unidos, del género, ¿no? Y tienen una tradición tan rica, tan larga, que él quiere estar seguro de que pueda al mismo tiempo honrar esa historia multigeneracional y larga, pero también contar una historia que sea personal, porque son una familia de superhéroes con todos esos legados, y que es probablemente el trabajo en DC que ha más disfrutado en los últimos tiempos en su carrera. Speaking of DC, you've got Absolute Flash coming up. Vas a trabajar en Absolute Flash, una línea nueva de cómics DC que son muy distintos a los personajes normales. It's very different to the mainstream versions of the characters. Can you share a little bit about Absolute Flash? ¿Se puede compartir un poco lo que va a hacer?
A little bit. I don't want to spoil anything yet, but Scott Snyder approached me maybe about a year ago with the idea for this new universe that they wanted to create, this absolute universe where we would take the core DC heroes and kind of reimagine them. And the idea being, you could take the basic concepts, the basic idea of Batman, Superman, Flash, but completely reinvent them. We didn't have to hold on to any of their history. We could do anything with them. At the time, I didn't know which character I was going to do. I was just sort of invited to be part of it. And Flash appealed to me because I got really excited about the idea of doing a teenage superhero. I hadn't really done that yet, and it felt like this new universe needed that, because I knew what Scott was doing with Batman and what Jason was going to do with Superman, and having a teenage character and having that sort of energy and youth was something that I thought the universe could use. So I really built the story around a teenage Wally West. And unlike, the mainstream DC version of the Flash is very much about legacy. There's the different Flashes throughout history passing on. And I guess the one thing I'll say about this Flash is there is no legacy. It's modern day Wally West. The Flash has never existed. He's the first to kind of experience this, and so it's kidding to see what his life could be like if he didn't have Barry Allen and Jay Garrick and all these other influences on him to teach him about what's happening to him. And it's really a really scary thing at first for him when these powers start manifesting and he doesn't know how to control them and he doesn't know what's happening to him. And we kind of follow it. We're very much from his point of view in this new world. And it's all kind of scary and new, and we get to kind of experience it with him.
So more or less the opposite of the JSA with the legacy and all the mentorship.
Yes, very much, yeah.
Bueno, hace unos meses Scott Snyder lo invitó a participar de este universo Absolute, donde los personajes los van a reinventar de cero. Snyder va a ser Batman, Jason Aaron va a ser Superman. Y él Jeff no sabía qué héroe iba a ser, hasta que se le ocurrió que quería hacer Flash porque quería explorar la idea de un héroe adolescente que nunca lo había hecho. El medio le iba a preguntar si era Barry o si era Wally, y lo contestó él. Es un Wally West, pero que nunca tuvo a Barry Allen como ejemplo. No sabe qué hacer, no tiene toda esa idea del legado que es clásica de los Flash, y en esencia es algo que le da mucho miedo al personaje de la experiencia porque no sabe qué está pasando, y es como un opuesto a su trabajo en Justice Society que hablábamos recién, que tiene que ver con el legado y la familia. Got a couple more questions, tengo un par de preguntas más antes de preguntar al público. I have a couple more questions before turning to the audience. I know they have some questions. I just read the first issue of Minor Arcana. Leí el primer número de Minor Arcana, el cómic nuevo, y le quiero preguntar si es de vuelta una historia personal, porque habla de volver al hogar, a veces cuando no querés, y una familia disfuncional, aunque tiene algún elemento fantástico. So it's a comic about going back home even when you don't want to, at least for the first issue, and dysfunctional families, which is unfortunately an experience many people we have. Is there something personal in Minor Arcana as well, going back to a small town and?
Yeah, it's not really autobiographical. You know, it is another small town. I love doing that. I love doing stories about families, but I don't know if this one is really personal in the way like Essex County was, where you could see certain characters in Essex County which were very much me. You know, the characters in Minor Arcana are a little more fictional. You know, they're not me. You know, but I still can relate to the experience. So yeah, I guess to answer the question, it's not biographical anyway, but I still feel very connected to the world and to the characters. You know. Yeah, it's very much a story. I think what appealed to me was this sense of a community and this character who doesn't want to be there and doesn't want to be part of the community, slowly realizing that she's the one that has to connect all of them and heal them, and it's sort of a story about that, about healing and about connecting everyone in the town together.
Dice que es menos autobiográfico que Essex County, pero sí tiene mucho que ver con un pueblo chico, con volver. No es personal per se, pero sí le interesaba la idea de contar una historia de una persona que no quiere estar ahí, de una comunidad, y esta persona que de a poco se da cuenta que tiene que ser la que tiene que unir a la comunidad y un poco dar un poco de curación, de recuperación al espíritu de la comunidad. Voy a robarme algo de un podcast de una amiga, que es un podcast de ciencia, donde le pregunta a la gente un fracaso del cual aprendieron, y otro del momento en el que dijeron mamá soy, en el caso de Jeff, mamá soy historietista. I'm going to borrow a page from a friend's podcast. She interviews scientists and she asks two things. One, a big failure that taught you something that made you better to succeed later, and a big success where you said, look mom, I'm a comic book author.
Could you repeat the first one again? I didn't.
Yeah. A failure, something that went wrong, but taught you stuff to move on and build upon that in future works.
Yeah, I mean, I've had many failures, you know, and I learned, if you can't learn from them, then, you know, you're in trouble. But I guess, I'm trying to think of a specific one from comics. You know, when I did the X-Men at Marvel, it was very challenging. There were so many people involved, and it wasn't the most creatively free experience I've ever had, you know, so that kind of taught me what kinds of projects not to do, because it wasn't me, and I couldn't put myself into that book enough, you know. And then in terms of when I was a success, that sort of, I guess the Sweet Tooth television show, my parents could really see that and kind of see the success that I had, so yeah.
Dice que sí, fracasos un montón. En particular en cómics, cuando aceptó hacer X-Men, no había mucha gente involucrada. Were you talking about a lot of people, the characters, or editorial-wise?
Editorial.
Había mucha gente de la editorial involucrada, y bueno, no se encontró, no pudo contar una historia y le enseñó a no aceptar ese tipo de proyectos. Y bueno, el momento que dijo mamá llegué fue literalmente Sweet Tooth, cuando la mamá lo pudo ver en la televisión. Bueno, si tenemos preguntas del público, vamos en orden así.
Thank you for, well, thank you. Thank you for everything, Jeff Lemire. Is that
thanks.
That's how you say your name, Jeff Lemire. Sorry, whatever. You started as an artist or as a writer?
I started as an artist. I started by drawing my own comics. So really, what drew me to comics originally was was artwork, drawing, because I loved drawing ever since I was really young. And when I first started, it was really just, you know, when I was in film school, I spent more time drawing in my sketchbook than I did going to class, you know, and I just loved drawing so much. And then it was really just learning to tell stories by drawing them is what I love doing, you know. And then as my career took off, I had the opportunity to also write for other artists as well and do that, but really drawing is my first love.
Le preguntó si empezó dibujando o escribiendo, y dijo que empezó dibujando, siempre fue su primer amor, y cuando estaba en la escuela de cine pasaba más tiempo dibujando en el cuaderno que yendo a clase, así que ese es su primer amor. Una más.
Okay. The thing is, I want to become a comic book artist, but the thing is, I'm stuck. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do when I want to at least try or even fail, even if I have to fail in the industry. Just want to have any guide of how I can enter as an artist, because my future, the thing I want to do the most in my life is become an artist. Sorry for asking you that, but any idea how you can enter in the industry like you did?
I think it's a different world now than it was when I started. You know, when I started drawing comics, it was 25 years ago, and we didn't have social media or the internet or anything, so it was very hard for me to like share my work with anybody, you know. And that's an advantage that your generation certainly has, where you can draw stuff and share it through social media and connect with other artists and other writers. And I think that's, more than anything, that's probably the thing I recommend the most, is trying to find other people your age who are trying to do what you're doing, who are at the same level you're at, and you guys supporting each other, because it's very hard and there's going to be a lot of failures and a lot of disappointment. But if you really love it and you find other people that love it, you can keep encouraging each other, keep supporting each other, even through your failures, because it's so easy to give up and to you know, think it's not going to happen for you and stop doing it. And you need other people around you who are trying to do the same thing that will help support each other, because that's the most important thing, I think. And then of course, it's just, you have to have a passion to keep doing the work every day. You have to want to do it more than anything else, you know. And if you have a support system and if you have the true passion for it, I truly believe eventually you'll find an audience and you'll find your way. You just can't give up.
Thank you very much.
He didn't ask me.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
I know that I've become quite successful now, but it was almost 10 years of me drawing comic books every day that no one ever saw by myself before I got published anything. So don't give up. It takes a long time, you know. It takes a lot of time, a lot of failure, learning from your mistakes, and not giving up.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to draw right now.
¿Ah?
I'm going to draw right now.
Great. El amigo acá quería saber cómo meterse en la industria porque quiere hacer cómics, y bueno, Jeff me dijo que tenés que tener una pasión y no rendirte. Hoy día es más fácil compartir cosas por redes sociales. Yo agrego que aproveches eventos como estos, que hay talleres con historietistas de cómo hacer tu propio fanzine y eso, y mirá los programas, Feria del Libro, siempre hay autores uruguayos ayudando.
I'm going to draw right now. Tell them.
I added that he has to take advantage of the different workshops and events like this, because there are a lot of authors here helping out with that.
Le voy a preguntar sobre el release de Sweet Tooth en Netflix y la relación de la pandemia en Uruguay, a ver si tiene algo que ver. Hello Jeff, thank you for coming to, at least virtually, to Uruguay. I don't know if you know, but when the COVID pandemic struck here in Uruguay, the release of Sweet Tooth Season 1 just started. So when I began to watch it, it was really traumatic, and I don't know if that was the intention for Netflix, or do you know? Do you happen to know that? Or I don't know if the books came when the pandemic was already in the US. I know it hit the US first. That's why I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yeah, the timing of the show and the pandemic were just a coincidence. You know, I had written the comic probably 10 or 12 years before the pandemic, so obviously it wasn't, even a thing. But then we had filmed the pilot episode for season 1 before the pandemic, so I think it was early 2019 we filmed the pilot in New Zealand. And at that time, we didn't know anything about the pandemic, obviously. And then as they started filming the rest of the season, that's when the pandemic happened. So it was all it was kind of just strange timing. Yeah, it was nothing planned, but it made it seem like we were prophets or something. It was just,
There were other similar comic book shows like Why the Last Man coming at the same time, or DMC, which is not a pandemic, but it's kind of similar. No, el cómic fue escrito más de 10 años antes de la pandemia y el piloto lo filmaron antes. Después vino todo, así que bueno, fue una casualidad. Y justo hubo otras series también basadas en cómic que tuvieron que ver, pero fue toda una casualidad. ¿Quién más? Sácate. Dale, pero para que te escuche la gente.
Lo que yo quería saber era, con Black Hammer, si el plan siempre fue crear un universo nuevo o simplemente fue casualidad que a la gente empezó a gustarle y tuviste que hacer más y más series y todo eso. La idea era que se empezó como una cosa... Sí, como algo con un principio y un fin.
We got a Black Hammer fan here. He wants to know if you always wanted to create a whole new universe, or it was a very specific story with a beginning and end, and then it just took a life on its own.
Yeah, that's basically it. You know, I had just conceived of that initial story of those superheroes living on the farm, and I kind of knew what the ending of that story would be. I didn't expect it to kind of have the success that it did, and when it was successful, actually what happened was we were working on the first story, and Dean Ormston, the artist, was sick, so he needed to take a little break. So we brought in David Rubin, a different artist, to do a fill-in issue. But I wanted to save the main story for Dean, so I had to think up a second story for David to do, and I can't remember what story it was, Sherlock Frankenstein, I think. And when I did that other story, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could do all these different stories with all these different artists, and it just opened the door. So it wasn't the plan, but it kind of grew out of necessity, and then grew out of excitement of being able to expand it and tell different kinds of stories.
We got another Black Hammer fan who confirms it was Charla Frankenstein. Déjame traducir. Dice que exactamente sí, empezó a trabajar una historia puntual con Dean Ormston, que es el artista original. Dean se enfermó y no podía trabajar, y hubo que traer otro artista, que fue David Rubin, un español, y no quería dejar la historia principal para Dean, entonces creó otra historia paralela, que era Sherlock Frankenstein, para David.
Esta es cortita nada más. El tema del maquillaje del personaje principal de la serie Sweet Dog, porque en el cómic original es más o menos feo, no quiero insultarlo tampoco, pero si se discutió ese tema con los maquillistas y los desarrolladores de la serie, se sintió el tema de la fealdad del personaje.
He wants to know about the difference between Sweet Tooth, the character in the comic, and the TV show. He doesn't want to be insulting, but he says that in the comic he's a little bit more ugly, and the kid in the show is very cute. If there was any kind of discussion you were involved with the makeup art designers and the producers on that?
No, not really. Obviously, the comic character, the whole comic book world is much darker and much starker, and I think when they did the TV show, they made it much more family friendly, and much lighter in tone. And I didn't really have any say in that, unfortunately. I think they did a good job, but obviously my vision was a little darker and a little more grown up. But in some ways it's kind of interesting. The two worlds are almost inverses of each other, where my story is kind of dark and scary and a little ugly, but there's a lot of heart underneath of it, and their story is much more bright and family friendly, but there is a darkness behind it, so it's almost the opposite, you know, and they're kind of interesting to read together or look at together. But yeah, I didn't have much say. If I were doing a TV show, it would be much more like a comic, obviously.
Dice que no tuvo ninguna participación en eso, que la serie es más apta para todo público, más ligera, mientras que su visión en el cómic es más oscura, más, no sé si realista, pero más de frente, más frontal, y que buscó hacer algo más adulto. Él hubiese hecho otra cosa con la serie de televisión, pero le parece interesante que se puedan ver y leer en comparación.
I'm sorry for not speaking any Spanish. I'm not Uruguayan, I'm Brazilian.
Okay.
And thank you for being here, Mr. Lemire. You write a lot of stuff. You write like 5, 10, 15 scripts a month. You draw a lot. You are a consultant on our TV series. You have a family. You have children. You have animals.
Farms.
A farm, I believe. Will you ever, or could you please write a book about how you do it? And what would be your first lesson for a creative life, for an organized creative life, as I think you have?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to answer that. I love working. I love what I do, so I always want to do a lot of projects, and I've always been very organized and very good with my time. But I am actually working on a book about my kind of creative life, and so there'll be an announcement about that soon, and it will have some stuff about how I schedule, and my work life will be in that.
El compañero acá de Brasil quería saber cómo hace para escribir 15 guiones al mes, tener una familia, mascotas, etc. Y si alguna vez va a escribir un libro al respecto de cómo trabaja, y bueno, Jeff está escribiendo un libro y pronto va a haber un anuncio. ¿Qué decir? Sí,
Hello. First of all, hello.
Hello?
I want to say first thank you for doing Sweet Tooth. That's my first approach to you and what you do. And I want to start to read your comics, and I want to know your opinion. If I should start with Sweet Tooth comics or with another ones.
Definitely start with, I would start with Sweet Tooth. It's a great way to start. Maybe I would do Black Hammer after Sweet Tooth. And maybe Descender. Those are three good starting points.
I'm gonna be repetitive and have primordial. You can tell I liked it. Quiere saber si, bueno, su primer acercamiento a los cómics de Lemire fue Sweet Tooth y quiere saber qué podría leer después de eso. Y Jeff recomienda Sweet Tooth, después Black Hammer y quizás Descender. Y yo agregué primordial porque si no se dieron cuenta me gusta. ¿Alguna pregunta más?
¿Cuál es su cómo es el escritor o dibujante favorito? Hay que lee para divertirse por ocio nada más, no por investigación, por nada, solamente por ocio.
Besides work, which artist or comic book writer do you read for fun, for pleasure? What is your favorite?
My favorite, I mean, some of the current modern creators that I really like, probably, Grant Morrison is great. I really like Kieran Gillen, Jason Aaron, Kelly Thompson. I love Love and Rockets, the Hernandez brothers, they're amazing. That's what comes to mind.
Bueno, esa parte no presta traducción, ¿no? ¿Alguna más? No? Jeff, thank you very much for being with us even at a distance. Hopefully this could be a face-to-face meeting at some point. Thank you to Montevideo Comics and the Canadian Embassy for facilitating this. Any message, any last words before we say goodbye?
No, just thanks for supporting my work, and thanks for coming to the event. It was awesome talking to you guys. Hopefully one day we can do it face to face.
I'll buy you a beer.
Sounds good.
Take care. Thank you very much.